Brain Salad Surgery, Emerson, Lake and Palmer's fourth studio album, was the end result of nearly a year of intensive writing, rehearsal, and touring. Keith Emerson recalls the personal chemistry involved in creating arguably the band's finest album.
Well, ELP were three very competitive individuals, not only in music, but in a lot of other respects as well. Well, when the competition was friendly, everybody would be receptive, and when it wasn't healthy, frankly, it was hell. Brain Salad Surgery, I think, was created at a time when everyone was at their most receptive level, and it hadn't been easy getting there. No ELP album was ever easy in the making. Brain Salad Surgery was the last real ELP album to be made before I embarked upon an orchestral crusade, if you could call it that.
Greg Lake also notes that the album was essentially the end of a very special phase in ELP's career.
I think what people really found appealing about the band was more its fantasy side, and I think that side of ELP was more predominant in the early albums, Tarkus, Trilogy, and of course Brain Salad Surgery. It's very difficult for me truly to be objective about looking at albums one against another, I can only say I look upon an album rather in the same way as you might look upon a bank check. It's a kind of promise to pay later. And to me, that's what records have always been. It's been a way to communicate without personally being there. And I think Brain Salad Surgery was one among two or three albums that I really think were equally as special as one another in that sort of sense of having some unique music and some interesting and groundbreaking production. And things were going very fast at that point in time.
For Carl Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery represented an unusual junction of talent, timing, and technology.
It was just that moment in time, I think everything was going for us. I think there was an awful lot of technology at the time. I think the polyphonic Moog was around about that time. I think we'd started using quadraphonic round about then, for the live concerts. And the musical design of something like Brain Salad Surgery, that was one of the things that I suppose we've not really captured as much. If one was to look at Emerson, Lake and Palmer and say, what would you play or what album, probably that one would be an album that somebody would want to play and say, hey, that's what they were all about when everything was going their way.
As the album's producer, Greg Lake offers a unique perspective on the sessions for the album.
It's an unusual position from which to produce, because being inside the band itself, it's very difficult to be creative and judicial at the same time. We were pushing the frontiers back there, and so I was always keen on as much innovation, sonic innovation as possible, and would work with Keith on all the synthesizer parts and contributions in that way. And also, I also had a kind of interest in just being a good, solid rock and roll band. And so I think my struggle really was to try and blend those two elements together in a band where all three members, quite honestly, are quite headstrong people.
Keith's massive original Moog console was given a dazzling workout on Toccata, the band's aggressive adaptation of Argentinian composer Alberto Ginastera's first piano concerto. The piece had long fascinated Emerson, who recalls the first pianist he'd heard perform the challenging composition.
João Carlos Martins, I think, was the pianist. He was a pupil of Ginastera, and he was playing on a TV program that the Nice had been invited to by Jack Good in Los Angeles, 1969, I think it was. And this thundering piece of piano work came out of the speakers, and it was just astounding. And I captured him in the corridor, and I said, "What is that?" He said, it is a new piece of music. It's by a very famous Argentinian composer. When I got back to England, I found the record, I bought the record. I bought the music, and sometimes I would play it at blank moments in ELP's rehearsal times. Now, Carl was always very encouraging. If a piece of music had different time signatures in it, he'd be there. He'd say, "Oh, got to do that."
It was one of those pieces that took forever to rehearse. It was very, very difficult to follow the tune, and what was going on. It was a piece of music that we all liked instantaneously. It was something that was definitely right for the band. I think it was Keith's idea to put the percussion sort of solo in that.
An earlier tour stop in Switzerland that year had resulted in the band meeting with a then-obscure Zurich-based artist H.R. Giger, whose masterfully airbrushed cover imagery elevated the brain salad surgery project to another level.
I think we got introduced to Geiger through a chap called Peter Zumsteak in Switzerland, who used to run an agency called Good News. And Peter mentioned to us that there was this artist who we could go along and see. We'd heard vaguely about him, you know. I didn't know too much about him. I think Keith knew more about Geiger.
He had a very small house, but the moment you walked in, I don't know, my only impression was a bit like having seen a Popeye cartoon, when he goes into Bluto's tent and he sort of looks inside and there's this huge, voluminous place and he looks outside, it's just a tent. That was Giger's house, you know, and it was wall-to-wall artwork. The toilet was scary, because all these hands were coming out, and you had to sit on these hands while you're doing a shit, you know. Well, we had the working title of Whip Some Skull on You at the time. Now, don't ask me why it was called Whip Some Skull on You. Well, you can. It was pretty crass, actually. A lot was going down, you know. I'm looking at Giger's paintings, and I see this skull. I think, that's it. And the next day, I get with Greg and Carl, so you've got to see this artist. He's really incredible. It really goes with what we're doing at the moment.
The guy was out there. He showed us a couple of ideas, and we thought, oh, yes, you know, this is our man. It's a pity he doesn't play an instrument. He could be in the band.
And we walk along, and they see the skull, and I said, well, there you go. We said, well, great, Giger, if you can separate that one bit out. We've got the front album cover there, and Greg liked the one of the woman with her eyes closed and the slinky kind of metallic hair hanging down, which turned out to be Giger's wife. What Giger was really proud about, though, was the penis sticking up in front of the lips. We kind of liked that as well. We thought, yeah, okay, that's very rock and roll. We had all these complaints coming back, and they weren't going to release it like that. It was obscene. It was pornographic. Well, I mean, all the band, we stuck up for it, as you say. We stuck up for the penis. But there was no way it wouldn't be released, so I had to call Giger up and I said, look, we have to get rid of the penis. And he said, I'm not getting rid of the penis. The penis stays. No, it has to go, really, because otherwise we have to use something else. Eventually what we had done was an artist to, with an airbrush, gently turn it into a shaft of light.
Greg Lake's balladry, as exemplified by Lucky Man and From the Beginning on earlier albums, was a key element to the band's enduring public appeal.
These songs were the balancing factors that made the thing sit comfortably as an entire album.